This game's been pending for a while, but it is time to check it out. So, as usual, let's dive into the story, gameplay, graphics, and music. Blasphemous II is the continuation from the first game. What we knew is that the Penitent was able to beat the higher wheels, thus finishing the Miracle's cycle, and with it, an era of chaos and destruction. That is how Mea Culpa's sword vanishes, as well as the Penitent's life. And this is where we begin this journey. The first cinematic shows Chrysanta, another Penitent who's going through a ritual to bring the Penitent back, as there is a new Manus around the corner, the Miracle's child, or that huge heart above in the sky. This is where we will see the Penitent coming back to life, surrounded by petrified believers, as he had become a cult figure. After this point and a little confrontation, the Penitent receives his next penance. Annunciada tells him about the Miracle's child, but this is not going to be an easy journey, as the Archconfraternity will try to stop the Penitent. After each confrontation, we will be able to get a fragment of how everything happened up until this moment. Needless to say that Soulsborne games were used as inspiration in this whole crusade, so you will be able to see plenty of lore, check many animations, read words here and there, and understand nothing of this story. Yep, there are some topics that left me thinking about certain events, as they are explained in cryptic ways, or perhaps you need to throw some imagination in between. For example, let's check Great Preceptor Radames. Most likely he was a father due to the kind of attire he uses, father who had to listen to plenty of confessions, but in this kind of world and thanks to the Miracle's abhorrent mutations, he was left as a skeleton inside of a broken box made of crystal, which is carried by another version of a father, who has a crystal crown, a club surrounded by corpses, and a purple cincture, which symbolizes the penance, a spiritual preparation, sorrow, and waiting during Advent and Lent, aside from being used in funeral masses. Once he perished, the real body is left behind, and we are sent into the dream world, where we listen how he was tormented by the remorse, thus asking the black gates to open, so he can finally rest. Which, at the end of the day, I believe explains why the real body was carried by a bigger version of him. Now, this is not the place to dive into every little detail, but we could talk for hours about the meaning of every boss, some of the secondary characters, and plenty of little details left and right, details that require perhaps several hours to properly understand. Considering most elements used in this tale, I would like to give it a 9. The deal with this story is that it can be a bit complicated to get. At least I will say that you need to finish the game 2 times to catch certain things, or the way some events were presented, but in a summarized way, you will get to know how that heart appeared and what is the meaning behind it, as well as the 2 endings the game presents. Gameplay wise, this is a platformer with exploration and some RPG elements. As it doesn't have the full RPG package, I won't call this game a Metroidvania. In any case, here what's cool is that right away the game gives you the chance to choose a weapon, between Ruego al Alba, a well-balanced sword, Veredicto, being something like a huge flail that hits like a truck but is really slow, and Sarmiento y Centella, a dual sword that hits quite fast. Don't worry too much about this choice, down the line you will get the other weapons, as they are needed to proceed in this story. Now, the beginning of this game can feel a bit overwhelming for those who do not have a decent experience exploring left and right, but the world isn't insanely long, as it is restricted due to story events. However, my best recommendation is try to hit as many dead ends as possible, and then mark them up with what you find in each region. If you see some blue bells, you can throw a blue mark. Those little cherubs inside bottles? Throw a red mark. And like that, be consistent with what you find. Down the line there will be so many options to explore, so if you did this quite well, you won't lose that much time. And that is something I really liked about Blasphemous II. It actually rewards you nicely. For example, if you find most sisters, you will have the chance to use the pre-DU or save points as teleporters. And that saves plenty of time as you don't have to mindlessly run everywhere. Needless to say that if you took your time to search around, you will have much more HP, vials, and stronger cures, extra levels for each weapon, and little items that can be equipped to customize the journey. I'll come back to this point in a moment. But for me, the deal is that Blasphemous II had a nice level of exploration, interesting rewards, and nice challenges. What's true is that you will be running around a lot, as the requirements to get the true ending are a bit cryptic, or at least it took me a while to properly get what I had to do. I know this can be seen as something negative, because sometimes you just want to complete the game and move on, but here you have to complete some events to properly reach the real ending. Personally, it didn't bother me, as they weren't that many. Okay, now diving into the customization. Well, it is rather simple. I believe it delivers, as you have the chance to change weapons relatively easy once you get them, and every weapon plays in a different way, plus all the skills you get out of them. So I recommend you to stick with one or two, depending if you beat many enemies. On this front, I know that the Tears of Atonement can feel like meh, as you cannot level up or anything like that. However, it is possible to get Marks of Martyrdom, so do not overcomplicate your existence and beat some enemies here and there, and buy some things. At least I will say some items are worth getting. Now, the other customization elements come with the items I showed previously. They can be obtained through different ways, like opening chests, completing side quests, or doing certain things in particular locations. What's cool here is that you can change your resistances depending from the challenges ahead, as some bosses just focus in a particular kind of attack, like using fire, electric, etc, etc. On this front you can also change the altar pieces, which are also obtained through different ways. Well, these altar pieces give you specific effects like extra damage if you have full HP, some extra crits, more Tears of Atonement, better effects with some weapons, and so on. And to spice things up, you can also change magics, but I gotta be honest, I didn't use them, perhaps once or twice in specific circumstances, but aside from that, I didn't bother using them, so I do not have a particular opinion. Maybe there were interesting things, but I don't know. And with that, I believe there is a nice level of customization, depending what you wanna do, because bosses here will beat the heck out of you, at least twice. Now I gotta be honest, I just had problems with a particular boss. This dude is the one that mopped the floor with me. Anyways, similarly as Soulsborne games, here each boss has different phases, so it is normal if you get destroyed a couple of times while getting their moves, and I gotta say that I like to fight them. There is always something nice about those little changes, adding annoying attacks, maybe throwing another character in between or something like that, as they spice the experience. My biggest complaint here is that I would just say there is a quite important boss that didn't feel like an important boss fight. It was surprisingly easy to beat, and yeah, that kind of things diminish a bit experience. Aside from that hiccup, to me Blasphemous II gameplay is a 9. There is a nice level of exploration with multiple routes and interesting connections between locations, plus plenty of rewards for those who take the time to properly look around, and to wrap the journey, they can throw some interesting bosses in each region. In the graphics section I checked glitches, aesthetics and other visual things. This is the Switch version of the game played on the Switch 2. The only issue I faced was while interacting with something like a tree and gold chunks, or something like that. Unfortunately, I didn't record the thing, but it froze. Simple as that, it froze. Fortunately, there was a save literally behind this room, so I didn't lose any progress. Aside from that, there were no other issues. Now, this is a gorgeous game. I really liked its aesthetic. I believe there are plenty of little details here and there that explain a lot without using any word. Details that those with attentive eye will catch. While tricky, it is always nice to have those particular things. And yeah, I gotta praise that the game has beautiful pixelated areas. Each region was a feast to the eye, showing a gloomy but interesting world with plenty of contrast. Sure, there are some areas that feel slightly monotonous, but aside from those particular experiences, I consider Blasphemous II delivers, as the effects, moves, attacks, and areas look quite polished. In this section, my only complaint comes with the little animations presented while acquiring specific powers or stuff like that. I don't know, compared to the whole pixelated concept, this is the only part that felt off, at least to me. So I believe a 9 is fair enough. It is a beautiful game filled with extraordinary details everywhere, amazing pixelated art, and interesting direction to build its world. And last but not least, its music. As the first entry, the soundtrack was composed by Carlos Viola, and all I have to say is, estas piezas musicales son la leche. Yeah, the moment I heard those 31 tracks, I was like, dude, this is what many video games have to do. Sure, they do not bring like 120 tracks as some games I have covered before, but in general, these compositions last for around 3 to 6 minutes. It is true that they do not change as quickly as other entries, but they do not feel as repetitive and monotonous as when they have a track looping and looping after 1 minute and 30 seconds. Best case scenario like 2 minutes. With this, don't get me wrong. I know that the general idea of a video game is to keep a homogeneous feeling, thus composing something around the aforementioned 1 minute and 30 seconds. But I believe that is something that had to change with the PS1 era, considering technological limitations. Anyways, here you will listen to the classic guitarra española, some soft percussions, violins, synthesizers, pipe organ, tubular bells, and surprisingly, a waterphone, the mythical instrument that gives ambience to plenty of horror movies, or at least that is what I perceived in the track named Cante desde lo más profundo. Now those instrument choices give Blasphemous II a unique vibe, as it feels gloomy but interesting to listen to, or at least that was my perception. With this idea, the ones I simply loved were Eco de los Pecadores, Palacio de los Setillos, Calle de los Velatorios, and El Segundo Salmo. To me the soundtrack is a 10. I love these compositions a lot, as they do not feel kinda conventional. It is quite unique. Blasphemous II final score is a 9.2. I believe it was an amazing entry to spice my journey this year, and while I really like it, I cannot say I do recommend it to everyone, as having to look around and getting your arse handed from time to time aren't activities that appealing for some, but considering you don't mind that, then yeah, it was a superb experience, filled with interesting regions, mechanics to play, and that beautiful but gloomy music. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.